Welcome everyone to the risk management in the context of program management. So managing risk vis-a-vis the program, if we are going to talk about it, this is the video you need to follow it up. The risk management process, what is it all about it? Risk is anything that is uncertain event. If it occurs, has a positive or a negative impact on our project objectives. Risk management is all about being proactive attempt to recognize, even manage internal events and external threats that affects the likelihood of the project success. What can go wrong? That is the risk that we are talking about it. How to minimize the risk event impact, the consequences, the outcome. What can be done before an event occurs, as in anticipation, and what to do when an event actually occurs, the contingency plan. So we are talking about the risk event, the consequences, the anticipation, and the contingency plan thereof. Let us draw the risk event graph. If you look into it, the risk is being plotted on the y-axis. On the x-axis is your project life cycle that goes around it. Remember, the higher the risk, the higher the cost. So if the risk is higher, remember we are trying at a higher cost. But as the project goes from the initiates from the final stages to the planning stages, and it increases the cost number of money that has been flown in. Why are we spending money? Because we are basically trying to manage risk. Remember, at the very beginning the risk is huge, and that's the reason why we are undertaking. And as with the passage of the first project, the risk gets mitigated, and the risk get mitigated, and the project becomes success. And this is how do we do it? With the help of the cost of the money that has to be spent around it. The advantages of risk management benefit a proactive rather than a reactive approach, reduces surprises and negative consequences, prepares the project managers to take advantages of appropriate risk, provides overall better control over the future, improves chances of reaching project performance objectives within the sorted budget, and it is always on time. The risk management process, what is it all about? It we are talking about four steps that goes around it. First and foremost is identifying the risk, analyzing the project, know what the risk is all about. It next is the risk assessment. In cases you've understood what the risk is all about, it now you have to assess the risk in terms of severity, in terms of probability of happening it, in terms of controllability, as it what goes around it. Step number three is your response to the risk, that is the deployment. Develop a strategy to reduce the possible damage. In fact, develop an alternative plan. Should I say the contingency plan? And the last but not the least step is the step number four, the risk management, risk response control. Implement risk strategy. Monitor and adjust plan for the major risk and change management thereby. So, what do we do about managing risk per se? You see, step number one is risk identifying. Generate a list of possible risk through brainstorming, problem identification, risk profiling. Let's say non-availability of raw material, capital inflow. There's a bottleneck. Uh, Talented or the requisite manpower. Again, there's a shortage around it. So you need to understand what kind of risk that a project might encompasses. Macro risk first, and then go on to the specific event. Step number two is your risk assessment. Scenario analysis, risk assessment matrix, failure mode and effect analysis, the FMEA. Probability analysis of probability of that event been occurring at all, decision trees, the NPVs, or the net present values, the PERT, PERT, or program evaluation review technique, the semi-quantitative scenario analysis per se. Now let us look into the breakdown structure of risk. You see, we have a project. There can be the technical verticals, the external vertical, which is beyond the project scope. There's an organizational vertical, which is within the everything is within the company and the project management. What we need to do with the technical, we need to do the requirements, technology, complexity, performance, and reliability, and the quality that goes around it. Similarly, for external, who is your vendor, supplier, regulatory authority, the market, the customers, and the weathers. Again, some can be managed to a certain extent, but most of them cannot be even touched. Organizational is project dependencies, resources, funding, and priorities. Project management is estimating, planning, controlling, and communication thereby. So, example of risk profile for a product development project. I'm just giving you an example. You have to draw parallels to your life altogether. Technical requirement is, are the requirements stable? Then comes design. Does the design depends on unrealistic or optimistic assumption? Testing. Will we be testing the equipment be available when, as and when required? Development. Is the development process supported by a compatible set of procedures, methods, and tools? Schedule. Is the schedule dependent upon the completion of the any projects? Budgets. How reliable are the cost estimate? Quality. Are quality consideration built on the design? Management. Do we know who has the authority for what? Work environment. Do people work cooperatively across functional boundaries? Staffing. Is the staff inexperienced or understaffed? Customer. Does the customer understand what it will take to complete the project? Contractor. Are there any ambiguities in contractor task definition? Let us look to the impact scales altogether, relative or numerical scales. As far as project objectives are concerned, be it cost, time, scope, and quality, let us take one at a time. So, in a 5 point scale, wherein 1 denotes very low, 5 denotes very high, 3 is the moderate in between. So, look at the cost, where it is going to cost it around it, where the project is going to eat the maximum money. Is it very high? Or is it very low? Is it somewhat moderate? Time, duration that the project requires to get completed, is it very low? That means insignificant time increases, less than 5%, more than 5%, more than 20%, very high time increases. The scope, similarly, you got to plot those scopes all together, and the quality as far as what is acceptable and what is not. Risk assessment form, if you have it, this is one which we require to go around it. The event, what are we look? See the likelihood of the event, probability of the event happening, impact, how grave the impact might be or how insignificant the impact might be, and detection difficult. Can you predict it? Can you forecast it? This is what goes around it. So risk events are interface problems. You need to rate every one of them and look at the conversions. Similarly, for system freezing, let's say there's a breakdown in your machinery, what goes around it? Likelihood of happening, impact, absolutely. If the system breaks down, everything, the production goes as a standstill. Detection difficulty, is it high enough or is it low enough? If it is high enough, you need to do regular maintenance, preventive maintenances, and so on and so forth. User backlash and hardware malfunctioning, as the case might be. The risk severity matrix, if you look into it, you see the green portion. What are we looking into? This is something which can be manageable. Now, what has been done on the y-axis is the likelihood of the event being happening, even if it at all. And impact is minimal on the scale. Minimum impact is again plotted on the x-axis. But what happened when the impact is significant and the likelihood of happening is much more? These are the point where you cannot do anything. Probably you would like to have projects in this schedule, drop them, don't touch them. If there are in between the yellow lines are the moderate zone. This is where you can take certain risks based upon your equipment, your luck, your understanding, or your competence altogether. Managing risk, that will continue. Step number 3 is the risk response development, mitigating risk, reducing the likelihood of adverse event will occur, reducing impact of the adverse event, transferring the risk, paying a premium to pass the risk to another party, or getting yourself insurance. Avoiding risk, changing the project plan altogether to eliminate the risk and the condition, thereby sharing risk, allocating risk to different parties as and when, as in you are hiving off to your vendors per se. Retaining risk, making a conscious decisions to accept the risk, thereby. Contingency planning, contingency, an alternative plan that will be used if a possible unforeseen risk event actually occurs. A plan of action that will reduce or mitigate the negative impact, the consequences of any particular event that goes around it. Risk of not having a contingency plan. This is a grave mistake. If you don't have any contingency or backup plan altogether, having no plan may slow managerial responses. Decision made under pressure can be potentially dangerous and very costly. Allow me to give you the risk response matrix for your understanding. See what has happened. Remember the interface problem, if we have, can we reduce it? If the contingency plans are there, obviously work around it until help comes around, or trigger not solved within 24 hours, and who is responsible. You need to give name of the person who need to be looking after it. System freezing, what do we go about? Reinstall operating systems still frozen after 1 hour, what to do? User backlash, reduce it, increase support staff, call from top management, and so on and so forth. That goes around here. The risk and the contingency planning, technical risk, backup strategies if chosen technology fails or falters, assessing whether the technical uncertainties can it be resolved per se, schedule risk, use of slack increases the risk of late project finish, impose duration date and be fixed about it, absolute project finish date as the case might be, comprehension of the project schedules due to shortened project duration. Cost risk, time and cost dependency link. Cost increases when the problem take a much longer time to solve than expected. Deciding to use the schedule to solve cash flow problems should be avoided. Price protection risk, a rise in input cost. Increase in the duration of the project is increased altogether. Funding risk, changes in the supply of the fund for the project can be dramatically affect the likelihood of the implementation or the successful completion of the project per se. Contingency funding and the time buffers as the case might be. Contingency funding, funds to cover project risk, identify and unknown. Size of the fund reflects the overall risk of the project. Budget reserves are linked to identified risk of the specific work packages. Management reserve are large funds to be used to cover major unforeseen risk. Change in project scopes and the total project thereby. We should look into the time buffers also, amount of time used to compensate or unplanned for any unplanned delays in the project schedule per se. Now, let us talk about the funds, the contingency fund, and estimate it is in thousands, probably in $1 million also. Activity, whatever what goes around it, the budget baseline of $500 or probably budget reserve is of $15 and the projected budget is of $515. Code similarly for $900, budget reserve would be $80 and the projected budget would be of $980. And similarly, you subtotal it. We would love to finish up a project within the baseline budget, but in case if things goes awry, you can take some of the money. But even if you are covering or completing a project within the budget baseline, the project is super successful. The project managers, kudos to him or her, absolutely wonderful person. But in case you are also eating up the budget reserve, your project is success no matter what, if only the scope and the timeline has been adhered to. That is what the projected budget would always be all about here. The last one would be the step number 4, risk response control. Risk control, execution of the risk response strategy, monitoring of triggering events, initiating contingency plans, watching the new risk as on when on following. Establish a change management system, monitoring, tracking, and reporting risk. Fostering an open organizational environment. I'm talking about transparency, repeating risk identification and assessment exercises, assigning and documenting responsibility for managing risk. Get a note of it and probably document everything that happens. Keep a record. This will help you to mitigate any adverse reactions situation and your project will become ultimately a successful one. With this, I come to an end of this video. Thank you for watching this video till the end.